Welcome, everyone, to Season 1 of the Going Deeper podcast. My name is Nate Schaefer, the lead pastor here at Passion Church. And joining me on this podcast are various leaders from our church and from the community. Now, our desire for this podcast is to help you as a believer pursue a deeper walk with God and to be vessels for revival in every sphere of your life. We hope this material helps you do that and grow deeper with the Lord. So let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of the Going Deeper podcast. This is episode 4, and we're going to be talking about when spiritual proposition meets spiritual opposition. But before we dive into that conversation, I just want to remind everybody our mission. Our desire is to inspire believers to pursue a deeper walk with God and to be vessels for revival in every sphere of life. That's why we are doing what we're doing. So let's dive into this conversation. When spiritual proposition meets opposition. Let me give maybe a little more understanding to this for us to dive into conversation. So God may call you to something. He may give you a vision or a dream. He may plant something in your heart to do or to go after, and then it's that moment when you start pursuing that and you meet that spiritual opposition in the process. So what does that look like? Let's just talk about that.
Yeah, I just think people bail too soon. They meet a little bit of opposition, which we don't really get here. I mean, we don't understand, I should say, here in North America. I mean, we think being called a Jesus freak is opposition. It's just crazy. But I was taught a long time ago, you need to stay longer than the devil does. And that holds true in every situation. So whatever you're doing, just persevere and keep going. There's a song, I can't remember if it's Laura Story or somebody. Maybe it's, I'll remember later. But it's just called It's Gonna Be Worth It. And it's just a great song, and she just keeps singing that over and over. And it's kind of that mentality. It's going to be worth it. When you see the land on the other side, it's going to be worth it. So stay in the fight and don't quit. Too many people quit too soon.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, we can look at obviously several biblical characters. Whether it's Noah building the ark, the opposition that he met with people saying, "Oh, you're an idiot. Why would you do that?" But especially the Old Testament, you can look through so many different stories and see how people met opposition. Different prophets, the good prophets, what they went through when Israel was just, a roller coaster of kings and emotions and, flight of fancy, what they were all into. But yeah, we can look at today, we can look at different churches. When a church decides, hey, we're going to go hard after God, we're going to build a facility, we're going to, start a ministry, we can see how spiritual opposition will rise up to, the target will be on the pastor, there will be on their family, or it'll be on the leadership, and there'll be scandal. And sadly, we can turn on the news at any point and you hear of another pastor falling. Yeah. And a lot of it does come down to, I know we talk about how important it is as us as men having accountability. Some of these pastors, they do have some people lifting them up in prayer, hopefully. But for the most part, it's a lonely spot. So that's an area where we can see it definitely in our world today, where a lot of spiritual opposition can be happening.
Yeah, so if you're watching today and you're a pastor, find community that you can be open with. If you are a congregant of a church today, maybe it's our church, pray for me, pray for our leadership here. If you're somebody from another church just checking this out and coming along this journey with us, pray for your pastor, encourage your pastor. He needs to know that you are interceding for him. It is vitally important. And what we do too often in church is we are expecting the pastor to intercede for us instead of us interceding for the pastor. This is the challenge for all of us believers. The people that are above us in authority, we need to lift them up. So when they're facing that opposition, they're first not afraid to talk about it. And second, they know that there are people. Listen, at Passion, we've got some amazing prayer warriors in our church. And I will tell you, I've had many moments where I am struggling and I come off the platform, or maybe I'm getting ready for church, and I just tap them. I'm like, hey, can you pray with me? I need prayer. And I explain what's going on because I want to stay in that place of transparency and humility so that when I get up there to preach, I'm not preaching and trying to fight off something that I could have been prayed for. So I think it's vitally important to do that.
Yeah, we don't. John Maxwell wrote a great book years ago, Partners in Prayer. And it talks about just that, about praying for the pastor, praying for the leader. Yeah, it really is a great book. And we don't do enough of that. Good. When I got called into ministry 30 years ago, somebody very trusted in Brenda in my life said, "Congratulations, your name's put on a list." And I said, "What list?" And they said, "The list by Wiccan. They're praying for the destruction of your marriage." Mm-hmm. And when we got called into ministry, so and I thought, well, that's crazy, but they didn't see it was too funny. But it's true. You have a target on your back as ministry leaders. You just might as well face that. Yeah. So that's where we need prayer. And so that target gets bigger every day to some people. But
yeah, especially as the church grows.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
I would say for just believers in general, I mean, because it's not just the pastors that face the opposition, not just the leaders of the church, the ministers. It's people that are going to pursue. I mean, God may call you into some form of ministry, and the moment you take that step, you're like, I feel like all odds are against me. Like, you can point to anything, and I am big on taking a look at what's happening in the spiritual realm. I believe that everything that's happening in the physical is a manifestation of what's happening in the spiritual. Right. But there are times where we can over-spiritualize things for sure. Oh, like I got a cold. It's the enemy trying to knock me down from doing something. Or I just have a cold because we live in a fallen world. Yeah. And it's not to downplay, because there are times where the enemy does come at your family and he causes intense illness in your family to keep you from doing what you're called to do. I mean, we know people that have been in those situations where it's like they take a step forward in what God has called them to do, and then they are met with so much physical opposition that their kids are in the hospital. I mean, just crazy stories of what you see. Mm-hmm. And so, just know, just like you said, and what we're saying here is when you face that opposition, I think a great, somebody in our church said this a couple months ago to me, one of our prayer people. They said, when you face opposition in what you're going into for the Lord, if it's something that doesn't honor God, that's a separate thing. But when you're facing opposition with something you know is going to honor God and bring kingdom glory, when you face that opposition, that is confirmation that you are moving in the right direction. And it's like, because I was in that place going, I feel like all odds are against me. Maybe I'm just not supposed to do this. Like, is it for God's kingdom? Yeah, it's to glorify Him, and it's going to build the church, build the people of God. It's God honoring and biblical. Okay, then you are in the right.
Well, we shouldn't be surprised by opposition.
No,
I think sometimes Christian leaders or ministry leaders are surprised that they get pushed back. That's amazing to me. That if they read the scriptures, Jesus shows up on the scene, and the demons just go, "What do you want from us?" They know who He is. They know what He's bringing. Mm-hmm. They know what He's going to do. And so why are we surprised, when we face opposition? Like, oh, me? Well, if you're going to do anything for the Lord, you're going to get opposition. Mm-hmm. Just bank on it. There's no question about that.
Yeah, and I know for myself, my natural tendency when opposition is met, not just in the spiritual, but just in general. Now, you go to a grocery store and someone's yelling, we don't usually engage. We kind of just are like, okay, you can have your Lucky Charms, fine, But in the sense of when there is opposition, our natural tendency is to languish, is to step back.
Sure.
But Christ calls us to step forward, to step into it, and Satan will do all that he can to cause us to take a step back. I think of we could do a whole podcast on C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters, one of my favorite. I love Narnia, but Screwtape Letters has a special place in my heart. But it's this idea that we tend to take this step back, but we're called to step forward. Because while Satan and his demons do have power, they do not have authority.
Right.
They don't have the ultimate authority that God has. God is in charge. Right. His son Jesus is in charge, and we've been given as believers the Holy Spirit. Therefore, we have the authority. We have the power if we take that step of faith to say, by the blood of Jesus, get out of here. I'm coming through, not you stopping me. And that's it's really hard to do. I'm not saying that to be tone deaf, like, oh, that's super easy. Like, there's days where I'm like, okay, God, you already won. Take a step, Nate.
There are days when you will say, is this worth it? Mm-hmm. And by the way, it was Rita Springer, not Laura Story.
Oh, right.
Yeah, Rita Springer, great songwriter and great leader. Mm-hmm. But, there are days you just want to check out and say, man, I remember one day when we ran the prayer center, the Quad Cities Prayer Center, I this is crazy. I drove on 53rd Street, turned left on Tremont or whatever it is. Anyway, there was a Lay's potato chip little factory to the right with the trucks sitting there.
Yeah.
And I looked over and went, I could do that. I could just go deliver chips and be very happy and not put up with all this crap. Mm-hmm. Because you just face it. You have to put it, you're going to face it. Mm-hmm. But it was so tempting. And I realized it was the enemy saying, dangling that carrot over there going, look at this. This would be a lot easier. Mm-hmm. A lot easier. But this is worth it.
I would say for me, like some of my worst days are when we've had our best services, like I find myself, it could be the most jam-packed, powerful service on a Sunday morning. And Monday is like the most depressing, sad, like I just want to give up. And I've shifted some things in my schedule to help with that. And it has been helping, but it's like you have those days. And so I think some advice, some wisdom that I've learned is identify whenever you're stepping into things, especially if you're a seasoned believer, begin to identify where it hits the most, right? Because, for me, it's going to hit different than it is for Nate and for Scott and for anybody else. It's going to be different. For me, because of my addiction to pornography that I had for most of my life, one of the places that I get tempted to fall back in is that area, right? It's like, but I just had an amazing Sunday and God, you healed somebody or you delivered somebody or you set somebody free in some radical way. They came to know Jesus, they got baptized. And it's like the next day I'm going, I'm fighting the enemy because I'm down. I'm slightly, depressed. And so it's that moment. It's kind of like Elijah, right? Like calls down the prophets of, or calls down fire on the prophet or on the altar, and the prophets of Baal, he slays them. It's this crazy story. It's amazing. And then what does he do after that? He runs and he hides out of fear. I mean, he just had this an amazing power of God on display, and now he's afraid. But what it was is he was exhausted. And in his exhaustion, his flesh spoke louder than his spirit. And that's when God came in and said, man, you need to rest and you need food. It's an incredible story, but that's really what it's like for all of us as believers. When you pour your heart out to God, when you go to do something, you face that opposition and you see breakthrough, you're going to have a day after all that breakthrough and after all that stuff, you're going to have a moment where you're going to be faced with going back to who you were. And this is where when we meet that spiritual opposition and breakthrough, we've got to continue forward, not looking back on where we were.
Yeah, I have two good friends that are in national ministry, and they tell me that the most temptation comes at the hotel room when they've had their best days in ministry. And it's pretty ironic. They, like you said, they have great days in both these ministries. They go back to the hotel room and they're just really tempted. And so they call somebody or they pray. But just be aware of it. I know a guy that takes him longer to get to work because he goes around the block away from an adult bookstore. He does it on purpose. He knows it takes him longer, but he knows where his trigger points are.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So you're right. Know where those are.
Yeah. that helps with facing that opposition. And you'll be blindsided sometimes, like, whoa, I was not expecting that. That's going to happen. Be ready for that. I mean, it's like you said, I think you said it, you just like, listen, when you step in, just be ready. It's going to be there. And that's not us cursing anybody. That's us just warning you that when you step into the call of God on your life, you will inevitably encounter opposition.
I think one of the things that, Scott, as the founder, pastor emeritus of Passion Church, Nate, you as a lead pastor, and, me just coming in the last 2 years as the APGAC, associate pastor of growth and communications.
Other churches will want to use that now.
You all have helped create a culture of a church where anyone from any walk of life, whatever they have dealt with, the doors are open. To come in, those that have dealt with alcohol. I think of our friends from 180, those that are dealing with drug addiction. I myself with porn addiction and other things that I know I've dealt with. There's been a welcoming of, come. Our church is not going to push you away. But when you do come and know that this is a place for repentance, this is a place for come in one way, but expect to leave changed by the Spirit of God, by the move of God that is happening here at our church. And so I commend you guys for us just having this culture where there's not acceptance of the sin, but acceptance of the sinner.
Right.
So
wow,
I think that's something that's really sweet. And our prayer team, my goodness, Sunday mornings, Wednesday nights, I watch the ladies and the men that are out there just championing, warring for those people that are hurting. We have such a sweet culture here at our church that there's just, come in.
It's getting out. Maybe we could do a podcast on this at some point, but as you were talking about this, something that came to mind was don't mistake God's refining as the enemy's opposition.
Yeah.
So you'll step into what God is calling you to, and sometimes it hurts, and it's not the opposition of the enemy.
It should hurt. Yeah.
It's the refining of God saying, okay, for you to do this, it's going to require this of you. And so, but what we do is we're quick to go, oh, well, then Satan's just up against me. And God's like, no, that's me trying to refine you so you can truly step in to what I've called you to.
Yeah. I always love just the visual of refining. When a blacksmith gets gold, they get it from ore, and in that ore there are impurities. And so refining isn't just you heat it up and it's good to go. It's the heat causes the impurities to be expelled out. And that's what God's doing is you're feeling your feet on the fire, but it's not because, you're in hell. This is God working on you on this side of heaven.
That's so
it's a little boy who, silversmith, was working on the silver to polish it and refine it. And the little boy said, how do you know when you're done? And he said, as soon as I can see my reflection. And I thought, man, that'll preach.
Yeah,
no kidding.
That's so good. Someone once said that Satan only brings opposition to a man that has a position. Yeah. And the more opposition you face, the bigger and better God's plan is for you, right? And we can take that, and we can claim that as a word of faith thing. But I think there is some truth to that, man. Like I think about some of the giants in the faith, like the opposition that they faced, and I'm over here complaining that I'm not feeling all right today, and they're being persecuted, in so many different ways for the faith. And man, this is huge.
Again, Jesus freak. They call it persecution.
Jesus freak. That's good.
That should be a compliment, actually.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. I wish we could. Oh, well, I pray that we do. I pray that we get to a point where we're just more, thanks, This is good. Well, thank you for joining us today. We're going to end this conversation now. And join us next week for episode 5, the last episode of season 1 of Going Deeper. And then we'll keep you in tune on when we're going to be launching the next season. So blessings to you all.